Hello, Africa. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another live chat here on DW Africa. I'm your girl, Josey Mahachi. Today we are back again to talk about Sudan, the update, and talk about the evacuation process and why it is taking Africa, or rather, why is Africa, rather African countries, finding it hard to evacuate its citizens from Sudan. To help me in this discussion, I'm joined by the founder of Gift of the Givers. It's a foundation in South Africa, Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman. Sudan journalist will also be joining us, Michael Atit. He is in Khartoum. Good evening, Dr. Imtiaz. How are you? And welcome to DW Africa.
Good evening, Josey, and good evening to all your viewers. And thank you for the...
Right. So let's go straight into it. Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman, you are the founder of Gift of the Givers Foundation. Just tell us more about the foundation for our viewers to understand exactly what you do.
Gift of the Givers is the largest disaster response agency of African origin on the African continent. We specialize, we do a lot of things, but in terms of disasters, we enter wars, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, famine. We go into different areas. We are probably the most complete disaster team in the world. We have primary healthcare medical teams, trauma teams, post-op rehab teams, trauma counselors, search and rescue teams, dogs. We build buildings, we build houses, we get involved in agriculture in a disaster zone. We provide counseling services, food, tents, blankets, and medicines. We provide medical equipment, search and rescue equipment. We were involved in the earthquake in Turkey and in Syria. We were involved in the typhoon in Philippines, famine in Somalia. We do a range of things in the continent, in the world. Famine in Nigeria many years ago in 2005. We have Zimbabwe, Malawi, and many countries across the continent.
Now, we are talking about Sudan today. A lot has happened the past few days in Sudan. I mean, lives have been lost, many injured, and the evacuation process, rather, is still ongoing. Tell us about that process. When did you get into Sudan? When did you start assisting when the crisis started?
I didn't get into Sudan, because what happened is like for the citizens of every other country, people all over the world, South Africans know us. They know we got involved in all kinds of crises. In fact, strangely enough, in 2011, we evacuated Sudanese from Libya and brought them to Sudan. And today we have brought from Sudan to other parts of the world. So on the 17th of April, I started getting calls from South Africans. It was then that we realized there was something wrong in the country because it wasn't much on the news. And as the calls started increasing, we realized people were getting desperate, they were getting scared, and they needed some kind of assistance. So we started holding their hand and said, can't you go to the airport? And then they said, the airport is closed, it's bombed, you can't get there. So I said, what about airports close by? I'm sure military planes can land. And then, of course, the bigger Western powers started sending planes to a military airport, or to an airport, not military, an airport 65 kilometers away. So we said, we can try to get our country to land a plane in the same area. But by the time the processes got sorted out, that airport closed, because the opposing forces were now fighting around the airport. So you couldn't use that. So the next option now was to go away to another country. The choice was either Chad, Ethiopia, Kenya, South Sudan, go to Port Sudan and from there cross across to Saudi Arabia, or the border with Egypt. So eventually everybody decided on Egypt. And then there was a shortage of buses. Because of the crisis, everybody needs a bus now. And then when you got the buses, then you don't have enough drivers. And when you have the bus and the driver, then fuel is a problem because of the war situation. And then a South African who was working in a very big company in Sudan got back to me and said, look, I can get buses, we got buses. 3 to 4 hours later, with the bombing, 17 buses got destroyed that we were supposed to get from him. We made other arrangements. We managed to find 2 buses. And of course, we were working in tandem with our Department of International Relations. We found the buses. And the other challenge is you can't do an EFT or a transfer or I pay by card. Everybody wants cash because the whole country is shut. There's no banking. There's no money. You have to have cash money. Fortunately, the money was available from the embassy, and we paid for the 2 buses. And they got to the border. And the other big challenge with a lot of people are having, they don't have their passports with them. Because the passports were lodged with their company, or maybe in the government department to get something. A lot of people are stranded without passports. And I mean, without that, you can't really travel. We got to the border. We left Monday at 12 o'clock. We got to the Sudanese part of the border at 9 o'clock the next day. It took us 4 hours to get through that border for the people who were there. Got to the Egyptian side. They allowed 30 through and 8 they held back because of no passport. It took 26 hours, just about 2 or 3 hours ago, those 8 got released. Now, those are the type of challenges that everybody's having. And I mean, even the governments can't take out so many people. It's expensive to bring planes. There's no fly zone. How do you take people out? Western countries, African countries, everybody, South Asian countries, and people are desperate. They're stuck in the country.
All right, so we're talking about Africa, right? Not just South Africa. I'm so sure there are other African countries, African nations that have contacted you as gift of the givers to also assist in evacuating. So how are you managing this, especially with the fact that you can't even be on ground yourselves? Who are you working hand in hand with in Sudan?
Well, our advantage is because we specialize in disasters, we have networks. We can actually run a whole disaster by remote control. You know, that's the capacity we have. In the process, to answer your question, our government got called by Zimbabwe, by Angola, and and they said Lesotho, and I think it was Botswana. If they can find the nationals, we couldn't find many of the nationals. We managed to find 7 Angolans, and they came out with us. One person from Lesotho came out with us. And this afternoon, on the way to the airport, we made some arrangements. The Zimbabwean guy was somewhere away, but he found his way to the main route. So we took the Zimbabwean person also. He's on the bus right now. The Angolans are out. The Lesotho person is out. And then, of course, there were some Sudanese that's also on the bus with us now. Then a few days ago, the Tanzanian embassy called, and they also wanted buses, and we were going to offer them the same buses, but then they got bombed. And then a day or so later, they said they managed to get their own buses, but they didn't go the Egypt route. They went south towards Ethiopia because the country is easier to go that way. So those were the only countries that called. And we said, if any other country calls or any other African national wants to come, if you've got the place, we'll take you. But there's 2 things. One, you could have at least a copy of your passport if you don't have the original passport. And when you have the copy of your passport, you have to inform your government to send a message to the Egyptian government that, it's a valid document, that you are who you say you are, and that you have a problem, and that when you come to the other side, please allow you to go through.
But Dr. Sooliman, how with some of the videos that we are seeing coming out of Sudan? Let me just show our viewers some of these videos. How possible is it that someone will find a copy of his passport? Just hold on. Let's just show our viewers some of the videos that came out of Sudan. This is how parts of Khartoum look like today. How possible is it someone will have copy of their passport or whatever? I mean, definitely it is a challenge. So are governments or rather countries supposed not...
A lot of people who travel make copies of their passports, and they keep it, in their bag or in their house or wherever. And a lot of them have it on their phone. Now, fortunately, those who have it on the phone, we could send those copies to their governments. We've done it for a few governments, for a few of the nationals. We sent to their governments and said, look, this is your man. He's with us. He can't communicate with you. The network is down. He can't get to you. He's on the road. There's a problem. Can you please make sure that you inform the Egyptian ambassador in your country that your national is coming? And when he comes to the border, please don't give him trouble, let him go through. But of course, some people didn't have any documents at all. And that's where the big challenge came, where the governments then had to trace through an ID number, to find a copy of the passport and keep the documents ready. Like the 26 hours they waited, a team from the South African embassy in Cairo had to fly all the way to Aswan, drive the 5 hours to the border, cover a whole lot of forms, sign a whole lot of things, and it took quite a bit of time. And eventually, after the 26 hours, they allowed the aid to go through. I don't know about other countries, but they don't have consular support. There was thousands of people at the border. Some people were waiting 4 days to get through. It's 40 degrees heat. You have children who are hungry. Because when you go to those countries, you're not alone. You got your kids with you, your wife and the husband and wife and the children and family and old people. It's not easy to access food or water. It's a war zone. There's no movement of goods. So the South African team, some of them hadn't eaten for 24 to 36 hours.
But is this not the time that governments are supposed to waiver even if someone doesn't have a document, just to make sure that we don't keep losing more lives? I mean, 4 days in that heat by the borders, nobody knows what these people are eating, water and all. Don't you think, Dr. Sooliman, when you are dealing with these governments, this is the time they should waiver and maybe do the process later in terms of documentation for these citizens from Sudan?
I agree with you completely, because this is not it's a humanitarian crisis. And in a situation like that, we have to be understanding. I think there is some kind of mention. My international relations were telling me there is some kind of law in international law where they're supposed to relax the borders and be a bit more adaptable. The one side is being adaptable, but secondly, some people are complaining that they're being treated like criminals, treated badly. You shouldn't be doing that. Unfortunately, a lot of people in civil service have not been trained. In crises like this, you need to be more compassionate, to be more understanding, not to shout at people who've been traumatized, terrified, who've lost family members. And remember, they may be there for years. They now leave their house, they leave their car, they leave their colleagues, they leave their workplace. They're going to an uncertain future. They're going somewhere else to find a new job. They left the country in the first place to get a bit better prospects. Now they're going back. And other people who are attached to the animals. One lady said, I had to leave my cat. Another lady said, I had 2 dogs. And when I was leaving, when the dog saw the luggage, I could see the sadness in the eyes of the dog because I was not taking him with. But fortunately, we have those 2 dogs on the bus with us now to reunite her with the owner, reunite them with the owner when they get across the border. But I mean, there's so many tragic stories about hardship and difficulty. People didn't want to leave their friends. They said we've developed relationships over so many years. But to answer your question, in a situation like this, there has to be maybe international law to allow greater leniency so people don't have this kind of crisis, this kind of challenges.
All right, we are talking about Africans who are not Sudanese citizens, or rather South Sudan, but who is looking after the Sudanese people right now? I mean, that's also a focus because the acting Minister of Foreign Affairs said the government of Sudan has no plans currently not Sudan rather, South Sudan has no plans currently to evacuate citizens in Sudan because the population is too big. Your comment on that?
Yeah, well, it's a realistic problem. They've got a historical issue with South Sudan and even in South Sudan itself, they've had conflict within themselves once they got the freedom from Sudan. So a country that has got that kind of crisis within itself only aggravates the situation. It leads to xenophobic type of attacks. It causes more negative sentiment, and you have to act in the interests of your people first. Yes, you want to take them in, but when your own country is not stable, you can't destabilize it further. You can't help yourself. You can't help anybody else. And and in this kind of situation, we need the African Union. We need the African Union to come in to say, okay, we are so many 55 countries, we can do our bit. And the first part is not about giving aid, is to get the warring parties to the table and say, look, what is the problem? You guys are from the same country. Both of you are destroying your own country. It makes no sense. And you're putting so many civilians at risk. You're destroying your economy, destroying the livelihoods of people. How long is it going to take to build this up again? And if we can do that part first, to bring in the reconciliation, and then the aid can come in from the UN and the WFP and the WHO to start bringing assistance. Because people are battling, they're hungry, but they're afraid to go into the streets. And I've been told by people, look, a lot of them go away to the farm. It's safer on the farm, you're out of the main areas, and you can notice that. The fighting is not in rural type of areas. It's in the biggest cities, in Port Sudan, in Darfur, in Khartoum itself. It's there. On the outskirts, it's quiet, nothing happening.
All right. Now you're speaking about the warring parties. Sudanese army accuses RSF of obstructing evacuation process. You are in the evacuating process right now, obviously, with your partners on ground. How true is that?
Well, we didn't see anything like that, to be honest. Because remember, we're only in one part of the country.
Yes.
We're not everywhere. But from the people that spoke, who even were moving around while the fighting was taking place and while they were moving from one place to the other, they said both sides were very courteous, to the people. And it doesn't seem like they were targeting foreigners. They allowed you to go. In fact, they were happy that you left and got out. This is not your war. You get out of it. So they said a lot of people, army factions of both sides at checkpoints who were courteous, friendly, and allowed you to go. But in this kind of situation, of course, you get the rogue element. You get people who don't follow discipline, who do their own thing, and that's a risk. Not in Sudan, in any country in the world. That's the risk when we have people who don't have ethics in terms of the army, in terms of military, in terms of relationship with civilians. So some people, some foreigners said they got robbed. Nobody got killed by warring factions in terms of when you go into a checkpoint or you pass them on the road. They robbed you, but they didn't kill you. And it was said that the Qatari convoy got completely looted, and other people got robbed, but they didn't beat anybody up from what we know. They didn't injure anybody, except one of the people who I know was shot by a rubber bullet in the leg. Other than that, of course, we can't say much because people were indoors most of the time. But I haven't heard anything negative about people being ill-treated by either faction.
All right, so maybe just to talk about our topic today is Africa always ready for these evacuation processes? Earlier on, off air, you told me that it's you've actually been approached as well by other countries, other nations that are not Africa. We're talking of Brazilian government. I think you also evacuated some individuals from US and Britain. So how do you feel? When you lead a foundation that you don't help not just Africa, but also even the West, when people actually assume that Africa is never ready for such crisis?
No, people have a very negative perception of Africa. And we as Africans need to change that perception. A lot of us don't believe in our own countries. We need to believe in our own countries, in our own skills, in our own capabilities. Take Mozambique, for example. How many times they've been hit by a cyclone or bad weather patterns? And quite often they will tell you, we don't want any assistance. We can do this ourselves. Look at Rwanda. It came out from the most horrific crisis, genocide. And look how that country has developed. It's a shining example of what can be done if you put your mind down to it as African people and you believe in yourself. But that belief can't come from government only. It has to come from the people of Africa. As Africans, we're going to say to ourselves, hey, we are somebody. We have faith, we have spirit, we have quality, we have good character. And this country doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to me and all the population in my country. It's a collective effort. We all own the country together. So we look after it together. We build it together. And when the crisis comes, we need to fix it together. As we have done now in Sudan. It's the government and civil society that have worked together, and the South African civilians that were caught all working together, because we are all one big family in terms of our own country. But we are one bigger family of 1 billion people in the whole continent. And that's why we need to do things together, have trade between each other, open doors to each other, have friendly relations with each other. It's our continent. We should be developing it in the most practical way as all the civilians in the country. So yes, Africa can be developed. We have the skills. We can do that. Even Malawi. You would think, all the floods came, Cyclone Freddy came. Yeah. But the Malawi Defense Force was there. The helicopters were there. They pre-planned. They learned from the cyclone of last time, and they had the building material, they had the mattresses, they had everything in place in areas they thought would be the most hard hit. They were organized, they moved, they did things. Great credit to them. So it's not possible.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Sooliman, for that update. But before I let you go, any advice to African nations? In terms of them preparing, I heard you mention Malawi, that they had the defense forces, they had helicopters. But it's something that we should really keep talking about. How can Africa always be prepared for such issues, for such crisis?
Well, the biggest way it's a military crisis. We should make sure that our number one priority in Africa, in all our countries, is social cohesion. We shouldn't allow it to get to this kind of stage, because in the end, in war, there is never a winner, especially if it's in your own country. We are all losers collectively in our own country, and the continent as a whole suffers. We're wasting resources building things that we shouldn't destroy in the first place. We can use that for health, for education, for water, for scientific study, to go to universities in the continent and outside, to bring back skills to upgrade our continent, agriculture, everything. So the number one thing is social cohesion between people in the 55 different countries. Then social cohesion between the countries itself, building the relationship. And if you have common patterns of disaster, of cyclones, of hunger, let's prepare for that in our budgets. When we prepare the government budgets every year, say, okay, I can't afford much, but I can put away $100,000 or $1 million or $5 million. So when the crisis comes, we are ready to intervene. And every year you add to that budget, and you build a reserve. And of course, that money is invested, and it grows and it grows. Because suddenly to look for money in hard times becomes very, very difficult. But to me, the most important part in Africa is that we need to rebuild relationships within our countries, bring social cohesion, and stand as one continent for development. We can be a power in the world if we learn to work together.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman, for joining us here on DW Africa as we're talking about Sudan. Unfortunately, our correspondent, our journalist in Sudan could not join us. He keeps sending me messages. He cannot connect. And I mean, it's something that we expect, obviously, in terms of internet there. He's having challenges. But at least we had Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman, the founder of Gift of the Givers Foundation. He had to tell us about the evacuation process in Sudan. Thank you so much, Dr. Imtiaz.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay. There you go, Africa. So I was speaking to Dr. Imtiaz Sooliman, who is the founder of the Gift of the Givers Foundation in South Africa, on the crisis in Sudan and the evacuation process. My name is Josey Mahachi. Until next time, take care.